Summer in 1944 in France. The Allies are on the offensive to try and break through the German defences south of Caen. A group of British tanks sit under cover in an orchard when over the rise 3 Tiger tanks appear, their Maybach engines roaring, and the screech of their tracks can be heard in the distance. Back in the orchard, inside one of the tanks, a Sherman Firefly, sits Joe Eakins in the gunner position. What happens next will be analysed for years to come. The tank commander orders the Sherman to come out of cover, and a nervous Joe is ordered to fire 2 rounds at the rear Tiger. This is only the second time Joe has fired this gun, and the first time in a combat situation. The impact of Joe's shots on this day will be felt all the way to Berlin. Joe Eakins was working in a shoe factory at the age of 17 when he volunteered to join the 1st Northamptonshire Yeomanry after hearing what was happening in Europe at the start of the war. He felt he had a moral obligation to play a part in the struggle to defeat the Germans and their ideology. Eakins was assigned as a gunner in a Sherman Firefly in A Squadron. Fireflies were Sherman tanks adapted by the British to have the powerful 17-pounder anti-tank gun fitted. The tank became known as the Firefly because of the bright flash it gave off from the muzzle. It was a hastily put-together solution in order to resolve the problem of the highly effective German armour. Winston Churchill gave the project the highest priority. The Firefly could penetrate 233 millimeters of armour at 1,000 meters distance. On the downside, the recoil and the dust thrown up when it was fired was incredible. It would jar the crew, and if fired at night, the extremely bright flash would cause night blindness if the crew didn't shut their eyes at the moment of firing. In Joe's squadron, there were only 3 Fireflies, and the rest of the squadron were regular Shermans. All the tanks were named after Russian towns in honor of the Soviet Allies. Joe's tank was called Velikiye Luki, after a Russian town where a fierce battle had been fought. The Fireflies had only been ready 6 weeks before the squadron was deployed, and Joe had only 1 session on the firing range in his tank. During the later stages of Operation Overlord on August 8, 1944, Joe's squadron was ordered to the south of Caen. The squadron were dispersed in a defensive position, which left Joe under cover of the orchard with 2 regular Shermans. When 3 Tigers appeared in the distance, only Joe's tank was able to reach them. Thanks to the Tank Museum, we have permission to use this recording they made of Joe in April 2009, where we hear him describe the battle in his own words.
We were in the orchard, undercover, looking out over a couple of 1,000 yards of fairly flat plain land. Suddenly there were 3 Tigers coming across our front, about 1,200 yards. 3 in line, some distance between them. We waited until they were about 800 yards. My tank commander pulled us out of the orchard because you had to move out to the other far. And he said, target the rear one. And I fired 2 shots at him and hit him, and he went on fire. You fired, and then you got back into cover as quick as you could. They were 800 yards, they were only tiny, but I could see the gun coming round. He fired at us, and I don't know whether he fired 2 or 3 shots or what.
At this point, Joe's tank was hit in the turret, but the tank was still operational.
We'd always been told that it took 5 Shermans to knock out 1 Tiger, and I'd imagined that I'd get some help. We'd got 2 other Fireflies in the squadron, because the ordinary Sherman at 300 yards could perhaps do a bit of damage, but 800 yards just bounced off sort of thing. I realised I was on my own. So we pulled out anyway again and fired at the second time. Hit him with the first shot and went up in an explosion. So obviously we hit the ammunition or something. By this time, the first tank of the 3 realised, I think, what was going on, and he started milling around looking for cover, so he turned a bit towards us. We pulled out and fired 2 shots at him, and I hit him as well, and he went up, and I thought, thank God it's not going to be us today. We pulled back again into the orchard and sat and shook. Relieved, you know. You were frightened, but you know what you could do. I did go and do it. What else could you do, you know? A certain amount of excitement, I suppose. You couldn't run anywhere, they were nowhere to run.
In just 12 minutes, Joe had taken out 3 Tigers. Unbeknownst to Joe, inside one of the tanks destroyed that day had been the Black Baron, Michael Whitman. Whitman was a household name in Germany and a cult figure as a Panzer ace. He was one of the most successful tank commanders ever and was credited with destroying an incredible 138 tanks. After this incident, and despite his expert shooting, Joe was assigned to be a radio operator for the rest of the war. He was baffled as to why he was put in this role. In 1945, Joe left the army due to illness. He went back to the shoe factory and married Gwen, his sweetheart, in 1946. They had children, and he rose to be a manager at several shoe factories. Due to the importance and notoriety of Whitman, after the war there were several claims as to who had destroyed the Black Baron's tank. The 4th Canadian Armoured Division, later the 1st Polish Armoured Division made a claim, and the 144th Regiment Royal Armoured Corps also claimed credit. The RAF claimed a rocket fired from a Hawker Typhoon from the 2nd Tactical Air Force hit Whitman's tank. But 8 years after the battle, Joe Eakins was told by historians that it was most likely that he had taken down the Black Baron in the second of the 3 tanks he had shot. His comrades convinced him that he should come forward and speak about the battle, particularly as others were claiming that they had brought down the Black Baron. Eventually Joe conceded and spoke to the Tank Museum and the press about his part. Even then, Joe was characteristically modest about the whole thing, saying, "In a battlefield, I don't think anyone can really be 100% certain what happened, but most historians now seem pretty sure it was me." In 1988 he retired. He held a black belt in judo and was given the Queen's Jubilee Medal for services to sport. On a visit to the Tank Museum in 2000, Joe was given the opportunity to fire the gun of a Challenger 2, the tank the British Army uses today. Not surprisingly, the then 78-year-old hit the target first time and became the oldest gunner of a Challenger 2. There is only one working Tiger I left in the world today, and you can go and visit it at the Tank Museum in Bovington and see it in action on Tiger Day. You can find out more about the Tank Museum and support the great work they do by visiting patreon.com/tankmuseum.